Welcome to an attempt to see if learning of music can be transmitted over the internet. I'm going to look at Chopin's waltz in A minor b150 today, which is a bit of a naughty thing to do because Chopin actually requested all of his unpublished works should be destroyed at the end of his life. We should be quite glad that his request was ignored because we'd be without several great works if that had been the case. The Fantasia Impromptu springs to mind, so I'm inclined to think that Chopin perhaps would have felt differently if he'd known how much joy would be brought to the world by these works which he thought perhaps were inferior or unfinished. This is going to presume that you have some basic knowledge of chords in root position, first inversion and second inversion, and also seventh chords. If not, I'll be putting up a link to tutorials on the basics of those. So first thing we're going to do is look at the notes used by Chopin in the left hand, which I've written out underneath here. So we have an A, and then A, C, and E. So A, C, and E, and that forms an A minor chord, which I've coloured all the A minor chords in orange. Next bar, D, A, D, and F. So if you look at A, D, and F, that doesn't look like a root position chord, so we need to mess around with the order of the notes. Let's try with the F at the bottom instead. No, that's still not root position, so let's try with the D at the bottom. Now we have a root position chord because we can see the spacings are equal. So the root is D, so this must be a D chord, and we can hear that it's darker rather than lighter sounding. So it's minor. There's more on how you identify major and minor chords in a theoretical way in another tutorial. Let's move on to the next bar. So we have a G in the bass here, and then G, B, and F. Okay, so the gaps aren't equal, so I'm going to again mess around with the spacing of the notes. Let's try the B at the bottom. Nope. And with the F at the bottom. No, it still doesn't look like a root position chord. So if we just turn back to the full score, we can see there's a D quite prominent in the right hand. So if we add that into our chord, G, B, D, F, that now looks like a root position chord. So G must be the root, and it's not a standard G major chord because there's an extra note which is a seventh above the G. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is going to be known as G7th. And the final bar of the first 4-bar sequence, C, G, C, E, G, C, and E. And if we arrange them so that the C is at the bottom, we have a root position looking chord. So that's C major. So actually, in the first 16 bars, there's only going to be these 4 different chords. There's some very subtle variations, which we'll look at in a bit. But for now, I'll just get used to playing those 4 chords just in a simple root position form. Improvise your own piece around them, so it's going to be relevant to look at making melodies that take the harmony notes from the chords. So as I'm playing the chord A minor, I'm going to make a melody of A, C's and E's. So yeah, just improvise any old thing. It could be absolutely terrible like that, or you might actually end up coming up with a piece that you enjoy. It's just a good way of getting to know, get inside the harmony of the piece. The next step I've written out is the actual melody as Chopin wrote it, but written above the most basic root position versions of the chords that we just worked out. And it sounds like this. So we're already starting to sound like we're making music here. We're going to just look at harmony notes here, which I've coloured in the notes in the melody to be the same note of the chord, if they're harmony notes, that is to say, if they're notes which belong to the chord. So in the chord of A minor, harmony notes will be A, C and E. And we can see, I'll write an H above the A's and the C's in the melody there. And when we move to the D minor chord, the harmony notes will be D, F and A. So I've written an H above the D's and the F's. There's no A's in this bar. Another interesting exercise is to play just the harmony notes in each chord along with the left-hand chord. Which gives a sense of the outline of the melody. I'm just going to go through all 4 lines like that, line by line. Now we're going to go back to looking at some left hand. So in the lower small stave, I've written out the basic root position chords that we've just found, and we're going to now reverse engineer them back to the texture that Chopin actually uses in the piece to create that sort of waltz feel. So we had A minor here, and then we're going to describe this to ourselves as a lower A, second to lowest A on the piano, and then a root position version of A minor up around middle C. The D minor chord again, but we can see they all have the root and on the first beat of the bar, so that's one thing that's going to save us a bit of time. This arrangement of the D minor chord has an A at the bottom, which is the 5th of the chord. So if we had the D at the bottom, it would be root position. If we had the middle note, the F at the bottom, we call that first inversion. And as it has the A, it looks like a second inversion. So it is very important to note that the musical effect will still be root position, because we're going to hear this low D all the way through the bar. But just for simplicity's sake, going to call it D in second inversion. I prefer to use the notation which is the 2 little I's. G7th, again the root at the bottom, and then it's a root position chord, missing the D in this occasion, as we already saw that could be because it's prominent in the melody. Also, he wants to preserve this sort of 3-part texture in the left hand, and it lies nicely under the hand, so it might sound odd to suddenly jump to playing the full chord. It suddenly gets very slightly thicker there, and also leaving out the B or the D doesn't vastly alter the musical effect of the chord, and it does make it lie more easily under the hand. And now we have our C major here, the root at the bottom, And it's another thing that looks like second inversion. You can already see that if you compare to the D minor chord. There's a larger gap at the bottom, which is going to make it more like a second inversion. So just scanning through to the second line now. It's all exactly the same except the first A is in the higher octave, and the G7th chord alternates between missing out the D and then missing out the B. I'm just going to skip back to the second line in the full text here. So on the second beat, the right hand has a D, which is why it makes sense to miss out the D in the left hand. And in the third beat, the B is a more prominent note in the melody, so he misses out the B from the left hand. Other than that, it's fairly easy to describe the whole of that left hand texture in terms of how we described the first line. So yeah, the first A alternates between the low octave and the high octave, and in the G7th chord you just have to think about the second line is the only line that he doesn't just straightforwardly miss out the fifth. So as long as you've got a musical reason to remember that, I think it's quite easy. So that brings us to the next step, which is to bring the full texture together. So I'd make sure that I can play the left hand all from melody, or you can work on it one line at a time. I would also want to know that I can shut my eyes and visualize those chords on the keyboard to feel that I really know that. And then it's a question of bringing them all together, which again I would try to do by visualizing in some way. So you could learn the melody more by ear and play it that way, or study, as we said, the pattern of harmony notes. Incidentally, you can label the non-harmony notes specific things if you know what they are. So the B in bar 1 moves from one harmony note to another one by step, so we call that a passing note. There's lots of mainly passing notes in here. In bar 4, the D sharp moves down from a harmony note up to the same one, so that's called an auxiliary note. It's a lower auxiliary note in this case. Anyway, again, not vital to know all of those labelings, but it might help if you want to just sort of be able to describe the melody to yourself in your mind without playing it on the piano. So I would try your best to try and picture one line at a time the melody on top of the simple version of the chords, and then on the full textured version of the chords, and then when you're ready, give it a go without looking at the music. Oh yes, and just note that in bar 8 there is no chord on beat 3, which is leaving room for the upbeat in the right hand melody to the second second half of the long phrase. Right, I'm going to leave it there for the first lesson, and then if this is proving helpful to anybody, then I'll come back with something about bars 17 to 32. Anyway, I hope this is useful, and enjoy your day.